Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today is going to be Tuesday, and we have ourselves a new lesson. We are going to be working with distances between 2 points on a coordinate plane. So remember, this is going to be on standard 6 NSC 8, if I'm not mistaken. So what we're going to do is, this is going to be a new thing for all of us. We are actually going to be doing the I do right here on a video. So I want you just to follow along. I want you to listen. I will let you know when I want you to start writing, okay? So there's a couple things about distances that I want you to be very, very aware of when you're actually working with them, okay? And this is what I would want you to write in your book, and I will pause the video and let you be able to do this, all right? It's these first two sentences at the very top, okay? If the points lie in the same quadrant, you subtract the values, the absolute values of the appropriate coordinates. If the points lie in the different quadrants, add the absolute values of the appropriate coordinates. Actually, you know what? Scratch that. Don't write them. Don't write them. I will provide you a sheet with these sentences on them so you can actually have them in your folder, okay? So, if the points are in the same quadrant, we subtract the absolute values. If they're in different quadrants, then we're going to add them. Now remember, absolute value measures distance, and distance is always going to be positive, okay? So remember that. When we are working with absolute value, we're talking about positive values, okay? So let's take a look at number one, all right? Find the distance between the pair of points, a negative 3, 1 and 2, 1, okay? So let's take a look at our coordinate plane. Here's a negative 3, 1, and we're going all the way down to here to 2, 1. Now there are two methods we could use. One, if you can't remember whether or not to add or subtract, count. All right. So starting in a negative 3, 1, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is 5 units of distance. All right. So that is something that we could sit there and start off with first. If you're unsure whether or not you need to add or subtract, go ahead and think about this as being something you can just count. All right. From one point to the other, how many units separate them. All right. Now, let's see whether or not we're right. Okay. So it says find the distance between the pair of points, different quadrants, so we add the absolute values. We know this to be true because negative 3, 1 is going to be in quadrant 2, 2, 1 is going to be in quadrant 1. So these are two different quadrants, so we're going to add the absolute values. All right. Now, before we add anything, there's something we need to identify. All right. What are the values that are different? Okay, because obviously we're not going to add the values that are the same. So what values are different? Correct. It's the x values. The x values are what's different. Okay, so that is what we need to focus on. The x values are going to be the values that we add here. Okay. Now, this states the horizontal distance from a negative 3, 1 to the y-axis. What it's asking for is what's the distance from this point here to the horizontal axis here. Okay. So we look at the x value. We take the x value and we substitute it in for the absolute value here. All right. So the absolute value of a negative 3 is 3 because it takes us 3 units to go from this point to this point. So 3 units to go from here to here. Now the same question asks, how many units from the y-axis to this point? Correct. It's 2 for those that are all thinking it. So it's 2 units from the y-axis to the next point. The absolute value of 2 is 2. So now we're just going to sit there and we're going to add. So the distance from a negative 3, 1 to 2, 1 is going to be 3 plus 2 or 5. And look at there. Our values match. 5 units, 5 units. So it checks. Okay. So that means we've done everything correct. All right, now let's take a look at number 2. So I'm going to slide up a little bit here. So negative 3, 3 and negative 3, 1. So we're looking at this point here, and we're looking at the distance to this point here. So the question is, are they in the same quadrant? Yes, they are. So if they're in the same quadrant, that means we're going to be subtracting the absolute values. All right. So now we got to sit here and figure out what numbers are different between our two ordered pairs so we know what numbers to work with. So we go back and take a look. -3, -3, okay? Those are identical. we're not going to be working with those numbers. All right, so the y values are 3 and 1. There we go. 3 and 1 are our y values. So we're going to sit here and we're going to say, okay, so the vertical distance from a negative 3 to negative 3, 1. So we're going to take the first value here, which is 3. The absolute value of 3 is 3. And then we take our second y value, 1. The absolute value of 1 is 1. So the question then becomes, what is 3 minus 1? And that's going to be 2. 3 minus 1 is 2. All right, so there we go. We have our distance. It is 2 units from a negative 3, 3 and a negative 3, 1. And then we could just verify this, okay? All right, we'll put a little line right there to identify that there is another number there. All right, so 1, 2. Sure enough, it's 2 units. And if you look very, very carefully, Mr. Hale's starting to draw a snowman. No, all right. Okay, so let's take a look at 3 and 4 real quick. All right, and this will be our last 2 problems we work here to practice this before we start talking about some additional practice problems, and then we go into a little bit more work together, okay? So the first thing here, so I'm Mr. Hale, he's going to get into his the student mind instead of his teacher mind, because I want you to see exactly what it takes to, what the process is here in my mind, okay? All right, so Mr. Hale has taught us that, let's see, if they're in the same quadrant, we're going to subtract the values. If they're in the different quadrants, we're going to add the values. So I'm going to look at my values, 2, 1, and 2, negative 4. So let me see where they're at on my coordinate plane so I know whether or not they're in the same quadrant or different quadrant. So I come back and I take a look at my coordinate plane. Sure enough, here's 2, 1, and here's 2, and negative 4. Well, there I'd be. Those are going to be in different quadrants. So if they're in different quadrants, that means I need to go ahead and do what? Oh man, what did Mr. Hale say? Oh, that's right. Mr. Hale said different quadrants are going to be adding. So I want to add the absolute values. So I need to go back and I need to look at the ordered pairs and I need to figure out which ones are different. So let's see, 2 and 2, those are identical. So those are obviously not going to be the ones I work with. But then look at 1 and a negative 4. Those are different. So I want to work with those. So I'm going to say, all right, what's the absolute value of a negative 4 plus the absolute value of 1? Okay, so that's what I need to figure out. The absolute value of a negative 4 plus the absolute value of 1. Well, the absolute value of negative 4 is going to be a positive 4 because that means negative 4 is 4 units from 0. All right, so negative 4 is going to be 4 plus the absolute value of 1 is going to be 1. So 4 plus 1 equals 5. It should be 5 units from 2, 1 to 2, negative 4. And I can check my work by counting them between the points. So I'm going to start at 2, 1. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sure enough, it's 5 units. I'm good. Yay. All right, let's take a look at number 4 then. Let's see if I'm just as good at number 4. So I take a look at 4. It says 2, negative 4 and 4, negative 4. So let's take a look and where they're plotted out in the coordinate plane. Here's 2, negative 4, and here's 4, negative 4. They're in the same quadrant. So if they're in the same quadrant, that means it's got to be a subtraction problem. Because that's what Mr. Hale told us. If they're in the same quadrant, then that means I got to subtract the absolute values. So let me go ahead and do this real quick. So 2, negative 4 and 4, negative 4. Let's find out what points are different. So I look. Negative 4 and negative 4 are the same, so it cannot be these two. So that means it's got to be 2 and 4. So I'm going to take the absolute value of 4 minus the absolute value of 2. And I'm going to sit there and find out my answer. Well, the absolute value of 4 is 4. And the absolute value of 2 is 2. So what's 4 minus 2? That's 2. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. And then I verify. So I'm going to count from a 2, negative 4. 1, 2. It's 2 units. That means I did it right. Yay! All right, so you've seen some practice problems. Let's see what we can do as a group, okay? So we're going to do a couple of checks real quick before we move on to the next part of the lesson. So be prepared, have your clicker cards out and ready to go, okay?